Good afternoon, and welcome to the Conversation with Al McFarlane. I am W.D. Foster Graham. I'm Book Review Editor for Inside News, and I will be your host for Book Chat Thursday. A Conversation with Al McFarlane provides inspiring, robust, and stimulating conversation on all aspects of the African and African American diaspora. Now, our viewership has praise God, exceeded 1,000 subscribers. So we're shooting for 2,000. Now, if you like and enjoy our content, please like it, share it, and subscribe. And basically, share it with your friends and fellow colleagues, those sort of things. Now, for our Book Chat Thursday, it is definitely my privilege to introduce Dr. Taiyon J. Coleman. So, for you, the viewers out there, let me just give you a little background on her. Her research focus includes U.S. American, African American, and African diaspora literatures and cultures, gender and women's studies, film, college composition, developmental writing, and rhetoric, creative writing, education, assessment, anti-racist curriculum, and consulting. Tyon's most recent projects include the published essay Fool's Gold, and she and three colleagues co-authored grant application, has received part of the $12 million in funding offered by the Mellon Foundation's inaugural higher learning open call for civic engagement and social justice related research and projects to develop an interdisciplinary, intersectional curriculum that would promote anti-racism. The grant project at St. Kate's was awarded $497,000 to use over 3 years. She is a Cave Canem and VONA Fellow. Her writing appears in Bum Rush, The Page, A Deaf Poetry Jam, Riding Shotgun, Women Writing About Their Mothers, The Ringing Ear, Black Poets Lean South, Blues Vision, How Dare We, Write, a multicultural creative writing discourse, and What God is Honored Here, writing on miscarriage and infant loss by and for Native women and women of color. Her critical essay, Disparate Impacts Living Just Enough for the City, appears in the best selling 2016 anthology, A Good Time for the Truth Race in Minnesota, edited by Sun Young Shin. Mapping Our Potential, a poem as a spatial and temporal mapping of human experience, is her TEDx talk. Her article, The Risky Business of Engaging Racial Equity in Writing Instruction, A Tragedy in Five Acts, published in TETYC, was awarded the 2017 Mark Reynolds Best Article Award, and her essay Poems as Maps, an introduction, appears in the August 2017 issue of Places Journal. Her articles, Making the Invisible Visible, a project at the U maps Minneapolis' history with racial housing covenants, and Sometimes I Feel Like Harriet Tubman, in the fall of 2018, appear in the Minnesota Alumni Magazine. Her book, co-authored with colleagues working toward racial equity in first-year composition from the Routledge Research in Higher Education series, was published in 2019. Her poem, It's Bigger Than This, appears in the spring 2020 issue of Mighty Nature, and her poem, What, appears in the A Moment of Silence anthology, which offers unabashed accounts by Black artists in Minnesota facing the George Floyd uprising and COVID 19. That being said, it is my good pleasure to introduce Dr. Tyon J. Coleman.
Thank you. Good afternoon. And thank you so much for having me.
Oh, definitely my pleasure. So Ty, I can call you Ty, right?
Yes, you sure. Please call me Ty.
Okay. So tell our viewers a little bit about how you grew up.
Wow. I'm originally from the south side of Chicago, born and raised,
Mhm.
one of five kids raised by a single mother. Um, there, I attended Catholic schools K through 12. Um, and stayed in Chicago until I decided to college. I did my associate's degree at Des Moines Area Community College, and then I did a bachelor's degree at Iowa State University, and I did another master's there in writing, and came to University of Minnesota as a Ronald McNair Scholar in 1980, where I worked and finished an MFA in creative writing. Settled here after spending a year doing postgraduate work at the University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. Settled here with my husband and took my first job in the teaching at a local community college. And I've been here ever since. After about teaching a couple years, I decided that I thought, okay, I could sustain enough work to finish a PhD program. And I returned to the University of Minnesota, where I completed my philosophy doctorate in English literature with a minor in African diaspora studies in 2012. And currently, I'm associate professor of English literature and gender and women studies at St. Catherine University, where I'm also the primary investigator for the Mellon Grant, working to develop interdisciplinary anti-racist curriculum. So, in a nutshell, that's it. But more importantly, I live here in the Twin Cities with my partner of soon to be 23 years and three beautiful children.
Yeah, which I had the honor of meeting when you did your book launch just recently. And so tell me so what's have things been like since your book has been launched?
Since the launching of Traveling Without Moving, Essays by a Black Woman Trying to Survive in America, published by the University of Minnesota Press, which launched June 4th of this month. It's been amazing, just all types of tremendous opportunities. So first, it's always gratitude, grateful to have my work out there, but it's also been an honor and very humbling to engage with people who have an interest in the work or what they're doing intersects with what the work is about. And I'm sure you know, as a writer yourself, you always have these notions or ideals of what you think you're going to write or what your project is. And then you get to the project and the project is complete. But I'm always so humbled by where the work goes in ways that I could never imagine it. Because in some sense, I think as creators, our job is maybe just to be in those spaces and tell what it is we think we know or how we can help or what it is we want to say. But we can never imagine how the universe or the higher power will use that work to touch and influence other people. So I just want to say it's been humbling and also a lot of learning, which I welcome. So it's just starting and I'm just ready for more. And my New Year's resolution for this year is no
Yes,
fear, right? I'm trying
right.
to say yes to everything so that I could just continue to learn and grow. So it's been just great.
Yes, indeed. Since I was already there, I was to say, all right, you go, Ty.
Thank you.
Now, now in talking about your book, what was your inspiration to write your memoir
You
or
know,
inspirations? I mean,
yeah, that's a good question. I think, and you and I talked a little bit about this before we started. I feel like every time I learn something, the more I'm humbled by how much I don't know, right?
right.
Even in the midst of what you're doing. So, believe it or not, I never imagined myself as an essayist. My MFA is in poetry, and for the most part, I've been writing and publishing poems here. Um, but when I was started teaching full time, um, sometimes you run all the way around the world only to confront yourself.
Indeed.
I started to be really interested in trying to figure out, okay, what my experiences were versus what were the experiences of the wonderful human beings who were in front of me, and respecting that they were completely different, right? Because no identity is a monolith. But also, too, thinking about my own struggles toward education, because my educational experience wasn't a straight line, right? And I do think oftentimes what things are recursive, things don't go straight. And I started to become very interested, not only in my one-on-one teaching experiences with students to support their success, but also looking at the structural things of institutions that also might be influencing individual experiences. And so I really just had the wonderful opportunity to be invited to write essays about certain topics based upon my experiences, based upon the places I had walked through. And then before I knew it, I looked up and I saw that I had several essays that I realized could be a collection, right? And I think sometimes that's what the universe does to you, right? Because maybe if I would have been thinking about it too hard, nothing would have happened, right?
Yes.
And then you look up, and through wonderful editors and other writers that I've had the honor of meeting and working with and being in the community circle with, um, who published my work, encouraged me, tasked me to write on certain topics. I looked up and I had a collection of work um, that was there, and I'm very honored that people felt it was worthy, that it could say something. I do think the essays span over 20 years, although it didn't take me 20 years to write them, but in a sense, 20 years of kind of looking back based upon my individual experiences and assessments, which can only be about me. I cannot speak for anyone else, but
Right.
hopefully, straddling those positions, those intersectional identities of who I am as an individual, but also working institutions versus the decades that I've been alive, and then based upon how I see the world of creating equity and empowerment and access for everyone.
Yes.
How might I write these stories that also include, as I'm a diehard romantic, as I know that you are, believing in love and compassion and empathy and innocence? And I mean innocence in a way of that. And I like to use innocence in a way that one of my favorite writers and mentors, Alex Pate, uses innocence in the Innocent Classroom, in the sense that we all get to be innocent. We all get to be human beings. And in a sense, when we're innocent, if we're afforded that, when we get pinched, ouch, it hurts, right? And
Mm-hmm.
maybe if we can acknowledge that along with love, we can bring people's humanity to the forefront, or start to find ways to rebuild um, those bridges, to acknowledge that. And I'm glad I'm with you today, WD, because I never thought, maybe I could have never imagined that I could have described it this way. In some sense, it's a love story, right? A love story to myself, going back to my younger self, and loving that person who struggled so badly, but also a love story to others, to say that you are loved too, and that there's nothing wrong with you. How can we figure out, despite the things that we've inherited that we have no control over, that we can still show up in love for self and love for others, through trying to untangle those knots and have, some very hard conversations, but also some very soft and loving conversations. And maybe that's the best way I can describe it. And as I'm talking to you, it's kind of scrambled, but in a way, you know, that's what I would say, if that is lucid at all to you.
Oh, most definitely. Because you think about validation, value, and say, just, hey, we all need to learn how to, the whole thing, how to love ourselves and also value ourselves as individuals. I mean, and oh, yeah, the same thing. I was talking to some people the other day about, I guess, validation. Say, I don't need to be going to seek someone else for validation who's not capable of giving it. So, one thing
But
I go ahead.
yeah, and I think sometimes, and again, institutions are these, if we can slip into sci-fi for a minute, there's
Hmm.
these institutions that we didn't create, but nonetheless they impact us, right? Whether it's housing, education, medicine, right? Just think of all the institutions we interact with on a daily basis, just in order to live our lives. And sometimes you can have experiences with those institutions that make you feel unloved, where the
Hmm.
institution doesn't love you. And that's even harder, I imagine, if you are from a constructed identity where you have been historically marginalized in society. And so you go through those institutions having experiences, and you think something is wrong with you, right? And you
Mm,
accept that narrative, as
right.
opposed to kind of slowing it down and unpacking and seeing where the institution
Yeah.
maybe has been part of that experience. So then how can not only through self-love can you love yourself and reconstruct and break down that false narrative, but also too, how might we change the institution, but first maybe by changing the people operating within the institution to
Mm-hmm.
make it so that people then don't have those destructive experiences. Because, you know, WD, you hold space for those who are not here,
Mm-hmm.
because so many people don't survive their encounters with institutions through no fault of their own.
Right.
And then we have to hold space for, and who's to say that we will survive ours, because we're actively, right, in the ing verb surviving,
Mm-hmm.
but every day it is a step. And I think that's how I look at it as I try to understand it. But I also want to say, writing my essays is an attempt to understand what happened, as opposed to just accepting business as usual, which I refuse to do. And maybe through the written word, it can be a way that I can try to make sense of my experiences without self destruction, or um, leaving myself behind, which, unfortunately often happens for women of color, particularly African American women who are descendants of slaves in America.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed, Ty.
See, we went there, WD. We wasn't supposed to go there, and I got to put on my glasses so I can really see really well. Break it down.
Well, hey, this is a conversation, so hey, we have these. It's good to have these conversations. Uh, I see, and you had a quote that inspired you. So I have two questions. First of all, the quote is by Zora Neale Hurston. If you are silent about your pain, they'll kill you and say you enjoyed it. And so my first question is what that quote means to you. And my second thing is to tell me about BFGS.
I knew you were going to go there. Okay, so first, Zora Neale Hurston, we're just going to say we're not worthy, bad to the bone.
Mm,
Harlem Renaissance writer. Their eyes were watching God.
hmm
Totally changed the game.
Well,
And just her courage, right? I mean, if you look at Their Eyes Were Watching God, how the characters speak the local Black dialect of the characters in Florida, but then the prose is written in the best standard English you can imagine. And the juxtaposition of the voices of the characters versus the standard English, she's being very real clear. I'm not writing this way to make you feel happy. I'm
mm,
showing you I can do both, but I'm privileging the other, right? I'm privileging my experience, the voices that are inside. And you're like, wow. And it took me a long time to get that right. I can remember the first time I read her work, I struggled with it, right? And I was like, wow. Sometimes, and I'm not going to say I don't value education, because I would be a hypocrite. But
mm,
sometimes education can make you forget who you are,
mm,
right?
hmm
And there's a way, I think, that one, not only, as a writer, as an anthropologist, she documented what it was like to be Black and be Black and a woman in the United States of America, but then also too to acknowledge her pain, to not see herself as tragically Black. Another paraphrasing a
mm,
quote, another quote of Zora Neale Hurston, but
hmm
then to be able to write about that, right? So you're not going to kill me, and then produce some narrative which normalized my death as if that's what I was supposed to do. And
mm,
I do write, and what's understood don't need to be explained. When I write about the murder of George Floyd, that
mm,
oftentimes in the United States, we set up a system where certain people's deaths are predictable, almost implicitly necessary. And we spin these narratives to normalize it. But really,
mm,
you're sacrificing certain bodies that you've determined are marginalized in order
mm,
for other people to benefit and prosper off of that. Kind of like this
hmm
benefit risk ratio. And
Yeah,
I kind of see Zora Neale Hurston saying, I refuse to go quietly, and I refuse to go without dignity. And I'm going to
right.
be resilient. I'm going to stand up. I'm going to tell my truth. And I think about Marshawn Lynch, who I quote often, right?
Yes,
He
yes.
says, I know I'm going to get got, though, but I'm going to get mine more than I get got. So I'm like, if you fuse, Zora Neale Hurston and Marshawn Lynch together, that means, okay, I'm in a system where I'm going to get got, but I'm not going to go quietly. I'm to talk about it. I'm going to make it look beautiful. I'm going to make it look sad. I'm going to make it any kind of way I can to document and to say that I was here so that not only um, will you not be able to lie and say that I enjoyed it, but you will not be able to kill me and kill my spirit.
Right.
That in a sense, by writing and existing and creating, I defy that murder. I defy that death, and I get to live and create. So that's why I like that quote. And you forced me to pick one, but I've already told you a couple others that I like.
Uh-huh.
And I think it's not fair. You get to ask me, what's your favorite quote? Can I ask you?
Well, my favorite quote is by Toni Morrison.
Mm-hmm.
And that inspired me when I first endeavored to start writing my novels. And it is, if there is a story you wish to read and it hasn't been written yet, then you must be the one to write it.
Yes.
Now, a very close second is comes from the Queen, Aretha. And she says, be your own artist and always be confident in what you're doing.
Yes. Isn't that something? And thank you for sharing those. Right,
Mhm,
two of my idols as well, especially Toni Morrison.
mhm,
And you think of Zora's quote too, that in some sense, Toni Morrison is saying we don't see our stories, and it makes it easier, right? When Zora Neale Hurston is saying that they'll kill you and say that you enjoyed it, I also see that killing or that murder as a literal killing, right? But also what creatively, right?
mhm,
Metaphorically,
mhm.
emotionally, right? Um, in every aspect. And so, in a way, when you stand in defiance of that, then you can do what Toni Morrison says, right? You
Mhm.
can not only tell your story, but then by establishing your story, like I do believe Zora Neale Hurston did, and Toni Morrison did, and Aretha with her beautiful singing, then you leave a record, right? You've documented it. They can no longer say that this thing didn't happen, because then you can refer to their works as
Yes,
evidence that we existed and
yes,
that we
yes.
were alive and we thrived and we were beautiful, we were brilliant, we were intelligent, we were totally the antithesis of all those things that institutions and history says justified our necessary murder and death to begin with, right?
There you go.
So we done brought it full circle, WD.
Yes, we have.
All thanks to the ancestors, right? Peace and blessings be upon
That
them.
on whose shoulders we stand.
That's right. Always, always.
Now, BFGS.
Black female graduate student, this man impacts living just enough for the city. Another reference to a lot of great quotes, right? Stevie Wonder.
Mm,
Um, yeah, in that essay, I write about visiting graduate programs that I had been accepted to, and I couldn't decide where to go. Should I go to Minnesota? Should I go to the South? And there were other schools in other states, and for some reason, and it was just my time in life, right? Everybody is different. I was very aware of still being the only one there, and what does it mean to be the only one there, and how do you see yourself and someone else, or versus how do you not see yourself, right?
mhm,
Was I seeing that Black graduate student, or was I seeing the institution's embodiment of what that meant? So that meant I wasn't seeing that person at
mhm,
all. And it was probably the first time in my own writing, right? Because there's one thing to like know something in your brain, it's another thing to know it in your heart and live
mhm,
it. And again, I don't want to objectify that person, beautiful human being, but it was probably the first time in writing I could separate the institutionalized body from the actual human body, which are
mm,
very two different things, right? Who we are as a representation of what we're supposed to be in order to move through the institution, which is oftentimes not healthy and um, unable to attain. It's also what a constructed identity
mhm,
versus what's really there. And I think by the juxtaposition of me being, a graduate student and this person being a graduate student, I was able to see the institution at play. And of course, is my way through humor, right? Compassion and empathy,
mhm,
use my perceptions of this person as a way to demonstrate what the institution does to us as individuals,
mhm,
that works to what keep us apart. I have a poem that I wrote for a Black principal in New York that
mhm,
died of COVID. And in that poem, I talked about, these are things that happen when people are confronted with two false choices between two things that are not real.
Mm-hmm.
And in some ways, it was my first time understanding that we were both victimized within these institutions, doing the best that we could. Um, yeah, and so I think that's what it is. And what does it mean when I entered graduate school in the late 20th century, into the 21st century, to still
Mm-hmm.
be among the few or the only African American woman in certain programs? What does that do to your body? But also, too, what does it do to the dynamic between two African American women or African American students to begin with?
Mm.
Right? It's a lot to unpack.
Yes, it is. And when I was reading your book and just talking about when you're going around to sit for different grad school programs,
Mhm.
you said you also went to Tuscaloosa as well as from Minnesota.
Yeah.
What stuck out for me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it says there are Confederate flags everywhere, even where we can't see them. Now, would you consider that, was that, say, a comparison or noticing that the same constructs existed in both places?
Yeah, I think what I was saying is that the both constructs existed in both places, but I was naive. I didn't understand that. And, in the essay, I talk about owning my ignorance, right? I'm two generations removed from the South, from Arkansas and Mississippi,
Mm-hmm.
but neither of my grandparents talked much about the South, although eventually they would retire and move back to the South, right? But it was long, once we were adults. My grandfather never talked about Mississippi. I mean, it was only later in life. And then, of course, when he started talking about those were stories that were not, you didn't want to hear, the very hard stories. So all I knew of the South was literally what was eyes on the prize. And I want to be clear, not every experience is the same. I had a lot of
Mm-hmm.
Black friends who constantly every summer went south to where they were from. That wasn't my experience. And, and these are my words, right? Going on the memories of stories. I think our family was so fractured, so just trying to survive on the paternal side. We were doing enough just to make it to survive in some sense, right? Living just enough for the city.
Yes.
There was no there to go back to. So I was very afraid of the South. So um, it was full of stereotypes, and not to mean that those stereotypes didn't exist, but people live in the South and thrive and do well very every day. So it's also the realization that to be Black in the South and be Black in the North is very different. Just like I'm sure to be Black in Minneapolis is different than to be Black in St. Paul. So I was being confronted with those stereotypes. And like I said, for the most part, in the essay, I talk about that everyone was particularly nice. It's just I wasn't used to those symbols. I hadn't seen them. And then when I saw them, right, they're in the context of how I had learned about them through Eyes on the Prize and other types of sources. So I think I made this faulty assumption that if I went to school above the Mason-Dixon line, that I would be safe, because I assumed that those flags were clear markers of danger, clear markers of trouble, which I'm sure they are. But my assumption was because those flags didn't exist in the North, that somehow it was safe, and that was a faulty conclusion, right? That was faulty, right? You didn't need to have the flags in order to have what the negative racialized experiences. And of course, and I'm not a historian, as I'm sure maybe a historian would talk about it differently, but I do think at this age I'm old enough to kind of talk about. I think um, I want to say in the early part of the 21st century, later 20th century, we've probably learned with the research and data, right, around 2015, or the beginning of the 21st century, we now have enough research to show that, ironically, some of the worst racial disparities are above the Mason-Dixon line in the northern states. So in some sense, us understanding, or let me say us, myself understanding the way in which racism really works, that just because you're above the Mason-Dixon line doesn't mean that it's safer. In fact, it's probably even worse, right? But, worse is a relative term, right? How we talk about that. And I imagine with research, we're still learning, the deep ways and how it affects marginalized bodies. So, it was me realizing that yes, the flags might not have been here, but in many ways it was just as cold and just as racist as what we would stereotypically assume about southern states like Mississippi and Alabama. No offense, right? But you can't walk away from the data. The data is real. And when I published Disparate Impacts in a good time for the truth, race in Minnesota, it was Wisconsin and Minnesota constantly vying for who had the worst or the highest racial disparities in categories which we would measure to determine the quality of life, right? Such as housing and education, employment, net worth. I mean, and these are real categories. And in my ignorance, right? Because in some ways, yes, I grew up poor, but there was a bubble there. I would have never imagined that it could be worse above. And I want to say it's part of us learning. And when I say us, maybe the United States collectively, the very insidious ways in which racism continues to work and to erode not only our humanity, but our diplomacy and our, not diplomacy, our democratic values, the access to democracy, our freedom, our ability to live as equal and free people in the United States holistically. And I think that when I was young, I was working so hard just to finish my education. I didn't allow myself time to think about that, which doesn't mean I wasn't getting dinged by it, but I was just so focused on being finished. I didn't have time to pull back and look. And I think Disparate Impacts is probably when you can say, at least for me intellectually or an essayist, I was finally maybe starting to do the process of looking. And I want to say that I'm still looking because I don't think I have a comprehensive view. I don't think I know everything. So many things about me have changed, right? I'm partnered, I have 3 kids, and I feel like every day I'm seeing something new that I didn't see before. So in a way, and I'll probably get dinged for this, I think those Confederate flags in the United States are everywhere. It is our legacy as part of how this country was founded, the ideologies that exist. And more importantly, not only are those flags there, but then those marginalized bodies are historic, but then also interchangeable.
There you go. And like I said, that's powerful testimony right there. So that being said, we're going to take time out for a little commercial break. But when we come back, I'll get the honor of having Ty share an excerpt from her book.
Thank you.
Oh, well. Well, it looks like it. Well, it looks like it's. We're gonna go ahead and do that now.
Okay.
So, but hey, like I said, this is a conversation, and we never know what things happen. So,
Flexibility, right?
that's right. It's all about flexibility. So, that being said, yes, now we'd love to have you share an excerpt.
All right. Well, I will read an excerpt from Fool's Gold, which is about the small town, Sparta, Illinois, where my mother's side of the family are from. And they were coal miners, worked in the printing plant. But the interesting thing about the town is that you're 45 minutes east of Missouri.
Mm,
And I write about Susan Borders, or Suki, who was, I'll put in quotation marks, she was a slave that had been brought from the South north when slavery technically was illegal as an indentured servant. And a wonderful scholar wrote about her through the letters of white abolitionists who worked to free her and kind of used her as inspiration. As in writing essays, I like to think about history and our connection to history and how maybe the experiences of the ancestors in the past, right, with institutions can help us understanding the experiences that we're having now.
indeed.
So I'll read an excerpt from Fool's Gold. Susan Borders, Suki, a Black woman, was brought to live and work in the Sparta area, along with her 3 sons as an indentured servant, de facto slaves, by Sookie White's master, wealthy Randolph County landowner Andrew Borders, from the state of Georgia in the first half of the 19th century. Randolph County court records show that Sookie was indentured to work at the age of 5 to Borders. And Sookie's children were indentured to Borders also before the age of 5, with her youngest son indentured at the age of 6 months. Once arriving in the Sparta area, Sookie traveled north on the Underground Railroad with her 3 children, Jared, Anderson, and Harrison, with the help of a local white abolitionist, William Hayes. Ultimately, Sookie's 3 children would be recaptured and returned to servitude to Andrew Borders. Jared would die in a farming accident, and her 2 other sons would remain enslaved. Sookie, a mother, would live the rest of her life free, but without her 3 children. And keep in mind, this is in a free state of Illinois. So remember we said earlier, where are those markers?
Yes. Yes.
When my mother died prematurely at the age of 49, it took me years to go through the boxes of her personal belongings. And even 26 years later, her boxes sit in my basement on utility shelves unopened. The one box I did open is an old Lane cedar box. It is full of old pictures, many in black and white, and the ones in early color are old, but still newer. Because the written dates and notes have faded with time on the back of the pictures, I don't recognize all the images, but I see hopeful wide smiles, pretty teeth, bright eyes, round cheeks, faces that are somewhat like mine, some more than others. However, it is not important that I know the people in the photographs because they are important to me because they were important to my mother. She kept them. The cedar box is also full of trinkets, dried pacifiers, honors pins, a broken pink rosary, old pennies, worn thin stripped paper, handwritten, finely cut hospital, infant ID bracelets wrapped in plastic. From the dates on the bracelet, I can make out which bracelet belongs to what sibling, and I count 5, as I am one of 4 girls and 1 boy, the baby. In the corner, there is what I thought was a black rubber ball, but once I unwrapped the old sandwich bag, a tight ball of black hair cushions my fingers. It is my brother's hair. I held my brother's hair in my hand, feeling the magic and soft evidence of loving and wanting more, the best for another human being, so much, and knowing that even though they came from and through you, they couldn't belong to you. At least my mama could keep my baby brother's hair. I remember that my papa and mama had words about it. If you don't cut this boy's hair, I will. You got him walking around here looking like a goddamn girl. Papa fussed at my mother. It was the end of summer when my brother, born in September, was 1 month shy of his first birthday. My mother, newly divorced with Catholic Church approval, drove 6 hours south from Chicago with 3 smaller kids to pick up me and my sister. School would be starting soon, and my mother and all my siblings would spend 1 week in Sparta before we made our way back north with a car full of 1 adult, 5 kids, too many cans of Shasta Pop, ham and cheese sandwiches, canned green beans, collard greens, sun-buttered pickles, and garden-ripe cucumbers and tomatoes stuffed in Kroger grocery store bags. Pawpaw packed our trunk tight with so much food from his 2 gardens, it was a miracle that the tail of our car didn't drag the road all the way north on Highway 57. You know, it's bad luck to cut a baby's hair before they turn 1, and I'm not cutting his hair until after he's 1 year old, said Mama. Stay out of it, said my grandma. My papa just gave my mama a look, shook his head, and walked to the shed at the back of the house to get more canned food. The way my papa fussed over preparing my mama for our drive back to Chicago, I was convinced for a long time that my mama was his favorite out of all of his 4 children, his oldest stillborn. As a child, I didn't understand what it was like to worry if your children had enough food to eat, and that worry never left you, however old your children became. It wasn't a wealthy white male slave owner who took Pawpaw's daughter north under false pretenses, like Borders took Sookie. It was a city slicker black husband who convinced her that he would love her forever, but instead believed marriage and gender gave him the right to treat her, a black woman with children, like an indentured servant, a slave. I wondered if Sookie would have kept the hair from her son's first haircuts. Was she even allowed to cut her children's hair? Was Suki a fool to determine and act upon her and her children's worth between the seemingly continuous traveling and moving in spaces and places of de facto and de jure slavery in the United States of America? Having 3 children of my own, still traveling and living north like my ancestors, as my husband and our children and I live in a state known as the North Star, I cannot begin to imagine Suki's pain, my ancestors' pain, and the pain of any parent who is separated from their child as a result of structural racial, gendered, and class oppression and violence.
Thank you,
Thank
thank you,
you.
thank you, thank you for sharing it. Yeah, when you're thinking about what did our ancestors go through, what were the things that they gave up that we might move forward? What were the sacrifices that they made, and through no fault of their own,
Yes.
so much.
And what was the way that they loved us, right?
Exactly.
My pawpaw didn't have money, but he could grow greens and put
Hmm.
them in a can and can them and give them to my mother
Hmm.
and weigh down the bottom of the car to where when I was little, I didn't understand that. But with my 3 kids, I totally got it now. And how can I go back? And then, like Zora Neale Hurston said, I can show where they loved and where they
Hmm.
struggled and where they didn't enjoy the oppression that they overcame that and what is the beauty in that. But
Hmm.
also too, and maybe understanding, thinking about Suki, right, as this indentured slave. Can you
Hmm.
imagine a 6-month-old baby, an indentured servant? And everybody knew
Mm.
that that was BS. But
Yeah.
also seeing where are we like Suki, where are we like my pawpaw, where are we like my mother.
Hmm.
So not only do they give us love, do they give us strength and courage, they also give us clues and keys to understanding the
Hmm.
experiences that we're having. And even in spite of those experiences, how to fight back, how to be human beings. So much, right? And I'm still learning. Um, yeah,
Well, it's as we know, all of it's an ongoing process, and
it
so
is. It is.
and that being said, when you write traveling without moving, um, what ways? Sometimes we don't think about it as we're writing it, but sometimes when after it's in our hands, how do you see the ways that traveling without moving changes the narrative? Number one, and also promotes healing.
Mm. Well, I don't know if it changes the narrative or that it adds to it, right? My hope is that it contributes
Hmm.
to ongoing narratives. And
Hmm.
I think those narratives exist in all forms, not just writing, right? So, where
Hmm.
does it exist in visual art? Where is it in
Hmm.
poetry? Where is it in songs? Where is it in essays or short stories or movies? And I want to contribute to that narrative, right? Everybody's having a conversation. What's
Hmm.
my 2 cents? How can I add to it? I can tell you though, in thinking about traveling without moving, sometimes you're trying so hard to run and to travel that you're not thinking about the experiences that you're having from day to day. And I feel
Right.
like in those essays, I was able to stop and slow down and maybe look at individual precious moments and illuminate those moments in order to create art, but also to create understanding. I don't think we can get around, for example, and I talk about the subject position that I am as an African American woman who is descendant of African slaves in the United States. If you look at the expectancy of African American women, if you look at disparities around health and income and education, um, it is horrific, right? Infant
Mhm.
mortality, everything. So, in some ways, time has moved, but has my position moved from one of picking cotton on a plantation in the sense of my life expectancy, how I am regarded, how I am respected, the experiences I have in institutions, not only in my own employment, but when I go to seek medical care, when I go
Mhm.
to apply for a housing loan, right? Like, so in some ways, yes, we've traveled, but have we moved if the disparities, for example, for African American women and African American people in general in the United States are worse today than they were since the civil rights? And hopefully there's a way that I can talk about that too, because I just think it's so central and important to the experiences we're having, especially if you have them in an environment where the world denies those experiences, where they try to tell you that you're crazy, that what's happening to you is not happening to you, that it's all in your head. I mean, and look at where we're at today. We have people banning books. We celebrated Juneteenth yesterday, and there are some states you can't even talk about why Juneteenth exists. And if you can't even talk about, just, I'm using one example, why June 10th exists, then when can you begin to talk about low life expectancies for African American women? Why African American women are more likely to die in childbirth? Why African American women are more likely to have hypertension, right? Like, what are the necessary discussions do we need to start to have? So, yeah, that blows my mind. Not to mention, you spend all this time getting this education, right? And then guess what? That doesn't change your vulnerability to intersections of race and gender. So my hope is just to contribute to the conversation, to hopefully illuminate it, to move it, to change, and to make it for the better in the best way that I can, or more importantly, how I think and see and move in the world. I'm a writer, I'm a teacher, I'm a poet, and so this is the way that I contribute. But in no means can I ever say that I'm right or I have the answers. If anything, if I can help people to know that they're not alone, right? Remember, we started with innocence.
Right.
If we could go back to that and I can say, I see you, I hear you, I love you, I stand with you. You're not alone because this happened to me too. Or maybe it didn't exactly happen to me the same way, but if I can bring you some comfort, even laughter, because I love humor,
Yes.
um, it's a way that we can spread that love, spread that innocence, and we can work then to not only survive but also to thrive. Um, and I feel like that's just where I'm at as a contribution. I often think about, not that I would ever compare myself to him, but James Baldwin's essays, and just always so moved by his naked vulnerability, but also the very humbleness, right? Of I'm here where I'm at right now, and I can tell you how I feel about it, and I've given you my 2 cents, and then I'm gone. Because I got
Yes.
stuff to do. I got to live. I got to go hang out with my friends at the cafe. I got to have my scotch or my, whatever I'm drinking. And I think that's what I want to do too. Like, okay, I'm put it down. I'm telling you, but then what? I want to live. There are things I got to do, and I don't have to carry all of that in me.
Right.
I can set it down because guess what? I came here to be a human being,
Mm-hmm.
and I get to do all of those things. So, yeah, that's how I feel, and I hope that I can do it justice. I keep thinking of is it Dr. Moore, the physician, and I always say that she was murdered. She died of COVID in the hospital, and she was a physician, and everybody she kept trying to tell them, look, this is what I need. You need to do this, and no one listened. And then they
Mm-hmm.
had the audacity to talk about that she was difficult because she wanted to live, and you weren't giving her the right treatment.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll just never forget that, right? And in some sense, I think, yeah, I hope in some way I can tell those stories because, you dare won't live another, century and say that this thing didn't happen. Or to quote Zora Neale Hurston, you dare won't say that you killed us and we enjoyed it. Or more importantly, that we deserved it.
There we go, as I say, because a lot of that comes up as what they call today gaslighting, and that's not acceptable. Um, so I want to ask you this question, because where you are now, as the awesome, powerful, and gifted woman that you are today, what advice would you give to your 13-year-old self?
You're gonna make me cry. That's wrong, WD. Why you ask that question? It's the advice I would give, that you're beautiful, that you're worthy, that you're loved, that there's nothing wrong with you, that you're not too big. There's nothing wrong with being a big black girl. There's nothing wrong with being sensitive. I would validate what you see because I'm sorry, I'm one of those people that I think kids, young folks are so much more smarter than the adults.
Mm,
So much more. Um, and I would validate that how you see the world and that it's true. And I'm sorry that sometimes adults are only human. They make mistakes too. And the world isn't always right, but you deserve to live. You deserve to thrive. You deserve to have love and you can still be who you want to be. Um, and that just to live your life to the fullest with no fear, despite even if you experience rejection and pain from others, don't let that define you. And that's what I would say for now. And then I'll just say this to you because me and my 13-year-old, we're still having a conversation.
yeah. Well, definitely thank you for sharing it. Now, so as the readers and the viewers of the show today, where can they purchase your book, Traveling Without Moving?
Thank you. They can purchase Traveling Without Moving at the University of Minnesota Press website. And if you just Google it, it comes right up, or in my bio. If you link my bio in the chat, at the very bottom of my bio is a link to Traveling Without Moving where the book can be purchased.
Awesome, awesome.
And thank you.
Well, and now, um, since we have a few minutes here, uh, can you share another short excerpt from Traveling Without Moving?
Sure. Um, let's see. I'm just looking to see. Okay. Um, I'll share. I referenced earlier, and what's understood don't need to be explained. I write about the murder of George Floyd, but I also write about being at an institution in St. Paul where there was a white security guard um, that accidentally shot himself, but said that it was a black man, made a fictitious black man.
Mm-hmm.
And you know the way my mind works, I always think everything is connected. And so for me, I write about that, but then I also end up writing about George Floyd. So I'll read a little bit of that.
Okay.
On a Tuesday, and again, the title of the essay, the chapter is What's Understood, Don't Need to Be Explained. It was on a Tuesday, just 2 weeks into the fall of the 2017 semester, when Brent P. Adlers, a white male security guard, was shot and wounded while patrolling a heavily wooded part of St. Catherine University grounds. It was 2 months and a year past the shooting death of Philando Castile by St. Anthony policemen and the start of my second year as one of the few full-time African American tenure track faculty members in the entire university. As I sat in my early 20th century high ceiling office, romantically gazing out of my large picture window, I wondered if it was the same security guard who mistook me and my Tanzanian American husband for janitors a little over a year ago as we excitedly worked into the night to move me into my new office. WCCO and the Minneapolis Star Tribune reported that Adlers told the St. Paul police that he encountered a black man around 9:25 that night. Adlers told the police that he confronted a black male who was wearing a navy blue sweatshirt with a short afro,
Hmm.
and that the black man shot him in the shoulder, ran through the trees, and jumped over a 6 foot plus fence, then disappeared. After hearing the story, I did the mental self check that most institutionally traumatized black people in America, who are always seen as naturally suspect, do. Am I black? Yes. Do I wear a short afro? Yes. Do I own a gun? No. Was I in the campus woods on Tuesday? No. Do I own a navy blue sweatshirt? I wear a nice navy blue top sometimes, but I sure it can't be mistaken for a navy blue sweatshirt, right?
Mm,
Can I scale and jump a 6 foot plus fence? Hell no. Will they think it was me? Only time will tell.
mm, mm,
So I'm joking around of that, black people are always suspect. So I'll jump to the next space in the essay. Taiyon, don't crucify yourself on a small cross, is what a world meaning white male supervisor and mentor once told me when I sought him out for advice on how to handle an equitable workplace experience I was having. I was being low key bullied by a white male employee who was my counterpart, but seemed to have an ongoing problem with my having more education and consequently earning a higher salary than he did, although
mm,
we held the same job title. I know, I should have known better. I wanted to believe. I wanted to believe that my education could really work and keep me safe from institutional and racial injustice. Your education is the only thing they can never take away from you. My mama constantly preached to me and my siblings growing up on Chicago's South Side. She neglected to talk to us about the things they could take away.
mm,
The job with the white boss was my attempt at achieving the American dream through employment assimilation. So I had accepted a career where the dress code required female employees to wear pantyhose. I don't think at the time my boss knew that I was a first generation, college educated, and fifth generation Black Catholic woman in resistance and recovery. I answered his deadpan crucifixion statement in a response to my complaints of racial discrimination and sexual harassment with a belly felt hilarious loud laughter that moved into quiet nervousness and a reflection that permeated my entire body. It's a feeling that comes when you know that what you've just experienced has marked your whole person, physical and spiritual, like annual growth rings marking a tree. My white boss's advice at the time assumed that my workplace crucifixion was inevitable, yet he implied that I had a choice in how I would sacrifice my Black life for others. He was saying, yes, Taiyon, when it is happening to you in the workplace, it's not fair. It is wrong, but let this one go. You will have bigger fish to fry. Another Catholic reference, meaning that some inequity and injustice is acceptable, may be necessary for success and daily life in our societies, cultures, and institutions. Was he saying that my direct experiences of racism and sexism and other forms of oppression as a Black woman are necessary in order to maintain workplace, read institutional and social, peace and order? I left that white boss supervisor meeting feeling that one day there would be an injustice so big that I would pick up a really big cross for it and do the right thing and eventually die. Death on a cross for whose benefit? Is this the gift? Who's the recipient? One lump or two? I felt like the 1950s cartoon character Pete Puma when Bugs Bunny invites him for tea and asks him how many lumps he wants. Pete Puma is trusting and assumes that his host, Bugs Bunny, is offering him sugar to sweeten his tea. Instead, Pete Puma ends up being beaten in the head.
mm.
I left that job and returned to classroom teaching. And in that essay, I write about this notion that in some ways, when we are complicit, no matter what color we are, in racism, sexism, homophobia, any type of oppression, what you are implicitly saying is that that type of experience for people to have, which can what lead to death and other, and that is a dangerous way in which for us to live as human beings, I would argue, in our society and world.
Got you. Oh, and I see he had a viewer here, Michelle, Delicious Delights.
Hi,
Yes,
Michelle.
hi,
Hi.
Michelle. And she says, wow, I am definitely getting your book.
Thank you
Great
so much.
show.
Thank
So,
you.
hey, we never know who we're going to touch. And as we are running out of time right now, I just want to thank you again, Ty, for your insights and wisdom and the power of your word and the gift that you are as a writer, an educator, and as a black woman.
Thank you, WD, so much. And right back at you. Thank you for having me. Honor and pleasure. And thank you to everyone who listened. Thank you.
Thank you. This is W.D. Foster Graham for the Conversation with Al McFarlane saying Thank you for viewing, and I'll see you on the next go round.
Okay.